So today I'm gonna do something a little bit different. Normally, so far, I act like this is a big thing. So far I've just done ham and GRMS radios, but for this video, I'm gonna do a CB radio. Now this is the Kraco Mayday 1. I forget the exact model number. I do remember it starts with KCB and then, actually it's on the back. There it is, KCB-4006. I have briefly looked this up, but there's not a lot of details I could find in the 5 minutes of time that I put into it. However, I do know this was made in the early 80s. It has a very early 80s vibe to it with its styling, and it is entirely plastic, but for some reason, it weighs a little bit more than it should for a plastic unit. So I cracked it open, and it is very early 80s on the inside. The breadboard is actually bread colored. There's a lot, well, everything is through-hole soldered, and I did not remove the board because I do actually want to use this, so I don't want to accidentally break anything. I tried to just lightly remove the board, but this antenna has to come undone, and I don't feel like doing that. So this is as far as it's getting. I'm not too huge into components. I just know things from that I've learned over the years, and also studying for all 3 ham licenses, what basically a lot of components are. So what you see, what the first thing I initially noticed is the amount of trim pots is just absolutely insane. Every square inch of this board has a trim pot on it, so I'm really hoping this thing works. The first time I power it up, I haven't been able to because I have no antenna for it right now. I do have a 12-volt cigarette outlet plug, and I'm sure you could just get any generic wall wart to make it work indoors, but right now I don't have an antenna. So if we close her back up, look at the top, you'll notice there's an antenna port. But that's, wait a minute, that looks a little odd, right? It is not an SMA connection. It is not a BNC connection, which I'm mostly familiar with older CB radios. It is just a straight thread. It is a single pole antenna, meaning this is the positive side only of the antenna. There is no shielding ground or negative side of the antenna in this port. This is strictly the positive feed of the antenna. And what that means is on the inside, there is the loading coil. You can barely see it behind that shield. That is the loading coil. It is just a spool of epoxy coated magnet wire that is very specific to the stock antenna on here, which means if I ever want this to work in handheld mode, I would need to either find the original antenna or the specifications of the original antenna as far as the length and thickness goes, and then I could fashion my own antenna without having to change the internal loading coil. Unfortunately, in the 5 minutes of research that I put into this radio, I have not found it. But going over the rest of the components, oh yeah, and while we're still on the antenna, there is an RCA jack down here, and I have found online on Amazon an adapter that goes from the PL connector to RCA, which will allow me to hook this up to my silver bullet antenna with the 213-inch whip, which should be ideal for 11 meters, because that makes the antenna pretty much like 5.5 meters, 5 3/4 of a meter. So that would actually make a great CB antenna just for testing this, and then I can power it off of a vehicle. Alright, getting off the antenna, let's move to the top. Here is what I can assume is the timing crystal, and then what it is glued to is what I assume is a very chunky timing unit, which is what allows it to use one crystal and tune into a total of 40 channels, because this is a true CB radio. And being a true CB radio, in the 5 minutes of research that I did, it is a 4-watt radio. I have no way of... Actually, I might be able to test that with the RCA port. I will be doing a future video on this if I get it completely working. Moving over to the right side, we have a 1/5 watt speaker, which shouldn't be too loud. It should be just about as loud as probably the cheapest radios out there. A lot of Baofengs, I believe, are about 1/2 watt, so this is half the volume of that. But it is a full dynamic speaker rather than a flat piezoelectric speaker that a lot of cheap radios use. Or at least it appears to be a big flat piezoelectric speaker. So this might actually sound better than your average Baofeng. Moving back to the components, there is a ton of caps. And they are fairly sized. Down here, I can only assume this is a tuning area because I see a bunch of air core inductors and some little flat ceramic capacitors all kind of snotted together. Up here you have your potentiometer controls and your channel selector control with a ton of wires coming off of it. So there's nothing digital about this radio. Everything is entirely analog. And it uses this gold zinc plated bit here to cleverly electrically ground everything together, because you got these little copper contacts, which are copper because they bend very easily, and every time I take this apart I have to bend them back. This one contacts up here, this one contacts over here, and it's kind of a V shape to fit on that. Very annoying to get it aligned. So once this goes back together after this video, that's probably the last time it's coming apart. And then you got a bunch of other magic going on down here. And then you have a fairly large, by modern standards, microphone. So I'm interested in seeing how that sounds. And right here you have a very 1980s looking LED. Very large. For whatever reason, they decided all LEDs in the 80s should be square. And for whatever reason, in the modern day, we decided that all through-hole soldered LEDs should be dome-shaped with a lens on the end of it. So pretty cool how dated it looks. And I'm trying not to slide it because I don't want to scratch my skin up too much. And the screws are sticking out the back. Moving back to the front side, we have our 1/5 watt speaker, which is pretty substantial. I like the way it looks. The microphone, I don't like this kind of styling where they make it look like it is more than it is. They could have just made it the holes. But so you have your microphone. You have your channel selectors, which are very firm, so you don't actually bump the channel and you don't notice that it's on the wrong channel. You have a manual squelch, which is not very commonly seen in a handheld these days. Everything handheld's pretty much automatic squelch. And then your volume knob. It's just like a modern radio where it clicks on and you get your volume out after that. And then you go down to 0, click it off. We've all seen it. And then finally, probably the largest push-to-talk button I have ever seen. It is a giant paddle, but it is surprisingly comfortable if it weren't for the volume knobs. If you're right-handed, you're kind of hitting the volume knob, but it is substantially wide, so it doesn't get in the way. If you're left-handed, it's actually kind of nice, and it allows you to hold it like at an angle. So if you're holding it like a phone, because everything was phone-shaped back then, modern days, everything's radio-shaped. But that's pretty much it for the most part. That is the Kraco Mayday 1 CB radio. It is mostly a vehicle unit. However, you could plug it into the wall. It came with its own standalone antenna, and it came with the option to plug in an external antenna, which I plan on doing in the future.